This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, where I have as my special featured guest today, Jay Bartell, who served as a behavior consultant and Black Ops operative for the CIA over a 10-year period. Information he conveyed in his memoir, The 231 Club, My 10-Year Journey from Therapist to CIA Courier and Sanctioned Kills, a true story. Jay has now become devoted to dealing with post-traumatic stress syndrome and putting his background as a behavioral consultant to work to benefit veterans. Jay, I think what you're doing is highly commendable.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. That means a lot coming from you.
Please do give us an introduction to your project and how it can work to benefit veterans.
Well, first, I'd like to start out with a brief summary of what goes on in someone's mind that causes PTSD, because everybody talks about it, but nobody really describes exactly what goes on. And what's interesting is that what goes on in the mind of someone suffering from PTSD is basically the same thing that goes on in anyone's mind when they get what I call overloaded. I call it ECO, and ECO means extreme conscious overload. So if you'll bear with me just for a moment, I'd like to explain basically how the mind works when it comes to overload. When we're first born, let's say my fist is our brain. And normally when you make a fist, it's because you're going to fight when you have a fist. Many people talk about fight and flight, how it's fight is attacking something that's threatening you or running away from it to try to protect yourself. Well, when we're first born, our mind is totally primitive, and they can go into all kinds of explanations about the lizard brain and so on and so forth, which really doesn't mean anything to anybody. So if you just think of your brain as being the fist, your brain doesn't have any logic or reasoning. It's just primitive, fight or flight. As we grow older, we start growing what we call a conscious mind. So if you'll notice that as we get older and older and older, we're getting 5, 6 years old, 8 years old, my little finger is starting to extend, which will represent the consciousness that we possess. The consciousness is about 10% of our brain power. The subconscious is about 90%. This has been proved time and time again by testing people with phobias, fears, etc. So the rest of my fist that's still in a fist-like shape is our subconscious. Has no logic, no reasoning. That's in the little finger. So when that logic and reasoning becomes overloaded, when our consciousness becomes overloaded with too many message units, we then trigger the subconscious to take over, and it will use fight or flight. When we're in a situation, and I'm saying too many message units, what I mean by that is every moment of your existence, you're being fed message units from your body, from your butt sitting on that chair, Jim, is sending message units. Even though you're not thinking about it, it's sending message units. The headsets are sending message units that you have that on your head. The sound of my voice, what you're looking at. So all day long, we're being fed message units. We normally deal with things in a logical and conscious manner. But if we become too overloaded, again, that logic and reasoning goes right out the window. I was dealing with a Marine once that had a fear of elevators. Now, this guy was a highly decorated Marine. Fought in combat, had a very high CK number, confirmed kill number. But when it came to elevators, because of something that happened in his past that was very traumatic, being locked in a little closet, we found out, punishment from his father, we found out when it came to approaching an elevator, because it was a closed, confined space, he would become very overloaded. So all these message units about the fear that he had experienced in the past flooded his conscious mind. Logic and reasoning went out the window. He responded with fight or flight, and his was flight. Now, you become very depressed. Well, how does depression come into it? Well, everybody talks again about fight or flight, but they don't really explain it in modern day time. When you become overloaded and you trigger fight or flight now in modern days, you can't go around beating up people, even though some people do get to that extreme. Normally what you do is suppress it. And when you suppress that need to fight something that's overloading you, you go into anxiety. Or you'll trigger flight, which in modern day is running away inside yourself and taking all that negativity inside and becoming depressed. So this is really how anxiety and depression works in the modern day, when you become overloaded. What's happening in our society now when it comes to overload? Well, let's take police officers. There's the majority, I believe, of police officers are very, very good people that have a good reason for doing their job because they want to help people. They really have a good motivation for becoming a police officer. But then there are those that have a problem with overload. They become overloaded too easily and then trigger that fight or flight and end up shooting somebody. So there's also the American people in general with today's election. People are very overloaded. Why? Because they've been constantly bombarded with not being able to get a job, jobs going overseas, the threat of ISIS now and terrorism. Everything is bombarding the minds of the American citizens. And some people say because of their reaction to all this overload, they make bad decisions. And people are calling them stupid. I don't believe the American people are stupid. I believe they've been overloaded for such a long period of time. They're doing anything in desperation to change what's going on.
Jay, just to interject, from the point of view of evolution and behavior, students are convinced there are four basic predispositions, which include feeding. They call them the four F's: feeding, sexing, put in a different way, fighting, and fleeing, as you're describing. So that those appear to be from the earliest evolutionary times in primitive human life. And what you're describing, of course, is that the development of reason and rationality as an approach to the understanding events in the world can be overwhelmed when you're confronted with a situation that is so threatening that you're confronted with the alternative of fleeing or fighting. Your illustration of a young man whose father locked him in a closet, of course, meant that became a terrifying experience for him. It induced a profound psychological aversion to confined spaces, so that when he approached an elevator, he was inclined to flee. I presume he would typically, therefore, use the steps rather than allow himself to enter an elevator. So I think from an evolutionary point of view, what you're describing makes perfectly good sense.
Well, what a lot of people miss is that they just go into, people go into fight or flight, but they don't go into fight or flight if they're able to maintain that consciousness with logic and reasoning. But too many message units, again, if the person is having a hard time trying to feed their family and they're being bombarded by more taxes, they're being bombarded by the fact that there are big companies now poisoning the food chain. All of this keeps adding up. They have to pay more here, more there. It's just constant bombardment. And the American people, not only that has been bombarding them, but also advertisement, the media. They're constantly, how many ads do they say that a person sees a day or hears about?
It's staggering, Jay, and you're making impeccable points about the average working class family, where they have to expend so much time and effort just to get food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. They get all their news in bites from the major media, which is highly controlled. It's become an instrument of propaganda and disinformation, and it's little wonder, since they, for the most part, don't have the background and training to exercise critical thinking ability, that they're by and large played for saps by the media and the political and economic corporations that control what is broadcast over the air.
Exactly. And then people say, well, they're stupid because they're making these decisions that are outrageous. And it's not stupidity. The American people are very smart people. They're very good people. And what I mean by very good people, when there's a disaster somewhere in the world, it's the American people, not the government. It's the American people that give more than all the other countries combined. The American people are a very good people, but they've been so overloaded for so long. I had a woman that came in one time that wanted to get a job at the post office. And she had 5 kids, and she had a husband that abused her. And she came in, and she was so overloaded that it took me sometimes a half an hour of working with her on the conscious and subconscious level using my process to get her to have 5 minutes worth of relief. 5 minutes. And then over a period of months, we got it to 10 minutes, and then a half an hour she could feel comfortable, and then an hour. We finally got her to a point where she could pretty well use my process on her own and continually feel good and comfortable without the overload. In fact, she even developed enough confidence and courage to be able to get rid of her boyfriend and get that job at the post office. So even though you're extremely overloaded to a point where you hardly ever feel anything but fight or flight or anxiety, depression, you can break that cycle. It can be done. But I sit back and I see what's happening on television. You listen to a news program and they're bombarding you with all this stuff, and they don't even do it in a professional manner anymore. They think instead of showing, it's all negative. It's all negative, and that's part of the problem too when it triggers overload and fight or flight. It's a constant bombardment of negativity. Turn on the news and what do you see?
One reason I believe what you're undertaking here with your program to cope with post-traumatic stress syndrome is that so many veterans are left at their own ends, that the Veterans Administration has failed to provide the kind of support that they were promised when they enlisted. It appears that our government is full of false promises and failure to deliver. Jay, it's truly appalling where the American taxpayer is being shortchanged because we're giving the government the money, but it's not spending it in the ways that it has declared to be its intent.
Exactly. And focusing now on the veteran situation, I find it absolutely incredible that they normally get their people from low-income areas, people that are uneducated, that are looking for some kind of a chance to bring about some success in their life. So they'll join the military. And I understand that. But to turn around after talking these people into situations where they can end up in war and getting killed or having limbs blown off is absolutely disgusting, not to, when they come back, to deal with them in a humane way. I heard a number in my research about all this and how the VA is working with PTSD. And I've heard reports from $2 to $3 billion are being spent on PTSD to help veterans. 2 to 3 billion, not million, billion. And then I keep reading article after article about how the VA doesn't even have a program to really track it. So they really don't know where these $2 or $3 billion are going and what they're using it for. Now what they're doing is they're putting veterans into virtual reality combat. So here's somebody that is suffering. Talk about overload. You're going to have a tremendous overload. They should be having a program. I offered this and never got any word back. And I've been doing this for, 45 years. So for 45 years, I've been working with PTSD. But but anyway, getting back to putting them over into these situations where now they're more bombarded than ever with message units. Then they ship them home. There should be some kind of a program that they come back to where they go through a conditioning process to eliminate this overload that they're going through for 1 or 2 or 3 tours. And there should be something over there that they're constantly going through while they're in combat. I mean, maybe not actually on the combat field, but when they go back to the barracks, they should have some kind of a program that they could be utilizing. And that's what my process is all about.
Well, when you mention, rotating tours, which it seems to me has greatly weakened, if not debilitated, much of our American fighting force, how about Sergeant Brandon Ketchum, who served 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and who sought inpatient treatment for his post-traumatic stress disease at his local veterans hospital, but receiving none, committed suicide just hours thereafter. Tell us about his case, Jay.
Well, like you just said, he was suffering tremendously. He was using drugs to try to combat the effects of PTSD. He had tried to reach out to the VA because he actually told the doctors that I have a mental problem. I have PTSD. I'm thinking of killing myself. I mean, he laid it all out for him. And what did they do? They showed him the exit. And within hours afterwards, he killed himself. And when I read about that, I just said, I got to put everything on hold and do
look at the failure there, Jay. I mean, he's a veteran. He's done his part. He returns home. He's suffering the effects of serving his country, admittedly in wars that were completely unjustified, in which we should never have engaged, which have squandered trillions of our national treasury. But he returned to the United States with the expectation that the Veterans Administration hospitals and physicians would provide him with a kind of mental, moral, and physical support he deserved, that he'd earned by his service, only to be rejected, only to have the door slammed in his face. It's hardly surprising that would induce an acute episode of depression that could lead to one taking their own life, as in fact occurred in this case.
Yeah, when people get so overloaded, remember the ECO, extreme conscious overload, your logic and reasoning goes out the window, and you're going to react. And if it gets painful enough, then what you're going to do is you're going to, in many cases when it comes to suicide, what you're going to do is you're going to feel that the only option you have is to die. That's the only way to get away from the pain. And there are other options out there, but you got to be able to get to these people and be able to get them into a state of mind where they're using more logic and reasoning to follow a program. But what they're doing is they're using virtual reality now. This is the big kick thing now at the VA, virtual reality, where they'll take someone like him, Sergeant Ketchum, and they'll put them in a virtual reality combat situation over and over and over again. And they're calling this, and you know this term, desensitization. They're desensitizing them by having them face combat over and over, to feel the explosions, to hear the explosions, and all of this. And that's their latest. And then they have an app out. There's very few apps. By the way, if you type in PTSD or veterans in the Apple App Store, you know what you get? You get a one little thumbnail dealing with a game. That's all you get. So in other areas, there are these PTSD supposed apps and recordings and everything like that. But they're so Mickey Mouse, and they don't address the main problem that the person's going through. There's the app that the government has come out now. You look at clouds. Relax, concentrate on your breathing a little bit, and look at these clouds, and you attach your problem to the cloud that floats away. Give me a break.
Well, Jay, you have statistics here about 8,000 veterans committing suicide every year. That's 22 a day. accounting for 18% of all suicides in America, 22 a day. That's practically one an hour. So that one or more veterans will have committed suicide during the course of our conversation today.
Yeah. And the women, everybody imagines a man when it comes to PTSD. Do you know what the women go through? Especially with the sexual harassment while they're in the military on top of everything else. So the women,
it's got to be traumatic all by itself.
Well,
I have long harbored the belief that it's a huge blunder to put women into combat situations because it's going to affect the performance of the unit. They're going to be so distracted by sex that they're not going to be able to focus on doing the job. I think integrating women into combat arms is a complete blunder, Jay. I can't believe. I mean, it shows a failure to appreciate the power of the sex drive in a sexually reproducing species.
To me, a woman is just as smart and can be just as strong as a man. Now, maybe their upper body strength isn't as strong as a man, but they have strong legs and they do have the ability overall to do what a male combat soldier could do, because I've seen it. Whether they should be still put in that situation, as you said, in combat is another thing. I just hate to say to a woman, well, you can't do something because you're a woman. But
well, I think there's a problem here from an evolutionary point of view, because the sex drive is so strong that when you have, for example, in a submarine, in my opinion, having women assigned to submarine crews is just a colossal blunder. I mean, just imagine the extent to which they're going to be propositioned and sexually harassed. I mean, living the life of a submariner is challenging enough, because you're immersed for long periods of time out of normal social interaction with the opposite sex. And I think you're creating an environment where it's inevitable that problems are going to arise. That's my take as a former Marine Corps officer who spent 4 years on active duty, including a year supervising recruit training with 15 DIs and 300 recruits under my command, going through the training cycle at the recruit depot in San Diego, Jay. It just seems to me, based upon that and my general experience in life, that it's a colossal blunder. I'm all for equal rights for women, but you have to adapt every individual to the role they're going to be best capable of performing within an integrated military unit. And in my judgment, mistakes are being made here that are actually deleterious to the morale and capability of our fighting force.
I think you make a good point, and I think it's a strong point also because of the fact that not every woman in the service wants to deal with combat. So there are a few that really would like to be in a combat situation. But I think overall, you make a really good point,
Well, I'm very impressed that you've been concerned with veterans since the late 70s, when you came across a vet who was sleeping in a doorway a couple of blocks from your office. Isn't that appalling, Jay, that we can do no better than that vets are reduced to sleeping in doorways? Give me a break.
Well, I think they say one of the estimates is that around 30% of the homeless are veterans. And to do that to men and women that you send overseas to fight, as you said, ridiculous wars for ridiculous reasons is it's horrifying.
And just to reflect on your background and qualifications, having been working in the field for over 45 years, you're a California state licensed marriage, child, family counselor with a bachelor's and master's degree in psychology, and that your process in dealing with what seems to me a form of behavioral therapy has helped thousands of people from all walks of life deal with a vast range of different kinds of problems in life.
Well, what's interesting is that my process seems to be the only the only process that's really different than anything else out there. And I know everybody thinks their process or the way they deal with things is very very unique. But if you went out and you bought say you were suffering from PTSD or just stress, or you wanted to become a better athlete, but you're too stressed out. When you go out and you buy a CD, or if there is an app for relaxation, you're buying the same product everyone else in the world is buying.
Right.
Okay, so
it's a standard product that isn't customized for the individual.
Exactly. So what they're saying to you is they're saying, Jim, you're no better or worse than the next guy that's buying it. Your problems are the same as the woman buying it that's an overloaded housewife that's trying to make ends meet. So they're approaching the situation. This is what the VA does too. They approach every soldier that suffers from PTSD the same way, as if they have the same type of mind, exactly, as if they've learned their problems the same way or their good traits the same way. Well, people are individuals. I started working in this area when I was 10 years old. My dad would send me out cutting wood on cold nights. So I was out one night with this little handsaw, and I'm holding a piece of wood and I'm cutting it, and I got distracted by some movement in the sky. And when I looked back down at the wood, the saw had jumped over onto my finger, and I was cutting my left index finger. Never felt it. So I run in, there's blood all over the place. My dad is yelling at me about being so stupid. And I thought at that particular time, I realized, hey, I didn't feel the pain until I saw it. So that put me on a journey of trying to find out how the mind works with the body. And during that time, for years, as a 10-year-old, I studied hypnosis and meditation, any book I could find on it. So at 12, I was like hypnotizing people and trying to figure this out and how I could help people. I finally got to a point where I realized that some people reacted differently to a suggestion than other people would. For example, I could say to you, Jim, did you buy that shirt? And if you take me literally, you would say, well, yes, I did. But if you work more on what you think I'm saying, then you might say, well, what's wrong with it? You don't like it? So people learn differently. And that's why with my process, it starts out with about a 3-minute quiz, yes and no questions, takes about 3 minutes.
You can't scroll up. Yep.
Yeah, you can't fail, you can't pass. And what it does is it tells me if you're more left brain with your learning or you're more right brain with your learning. So with my process, you take that little quiz, and what happens with the app that I want to build, it will then download the recordings that fit you as an individual. And that's what it's going to be for the PTSD, the stress, sports performance. But right now I'm focusing on the PTSD, obviously.
So what you do basically, Jay, is a diagnosis of the individual based on their background experience, their psychological orientation, how they work, and then design an app specifically for them.
Yes, that fits their way of learning. Because when you grew up, you're like a sponge with feet. You're soaking up everything. And you have no logic. You remember the fist and the little finger, the consciousness isn't totally developed until around 10, 12 years of age, when you're really starting to use logic and reasoning. What happens is that during that time that you're growing up, you're learning things differently than someone else, because nobody grew up exactly. Even if you had a twin brother, that twin brother could see things or experience things different than you. So you need, when you're working with a program to help develop yourself, you need a program that fits the program to you, not you to the program.
Yes.
So that's what I'm working on in order to try to get the app built, is to get a hold of companies, to get a hold of individuals that are interested in trying.
Why don't you scroll up so the process is seen in its totality? Yeah, there we go. Stop. No, go back just a bit, Jay.
Oh, yeah.
Right, the process, just let's go through it again.
Yeah.
A veteran begins by taking a simple 3-minute quiz indicating the way they learn. Based on the quiz results, the app downloads 5 11-minute recordings that match the user's learning type. The recordings combat each of the elements that stimulate stress, which is accomplished by building one's ability to relax, stay calm, be confident in situations that otherwise would be stressful, and reinforce the motivation necessary to succeed. That's really rather fascinating, Jay, and I take it if you scroll further to this first endorsement, for example, Judd McIlvaine, who has 2 Emmys and 8 Golden Mike Awards for investigative reporting, has remarked, "I'm a veteran and ex-military police officer. I've seen firsthand over the years the incredible results that Jay Bartell's process has accomplished helping veterans overcome PTSD." Well, I think that's just terrific, Jay.
I was really happy about that. Judd had done an interview with me, a long interview. In fact, it was the first one dealing with the subject of the 231 Club. He was just remarkable. He was fantastic, great interviewer, like yourself. I really mean that.
And Judd's done reports for CBS, ABC, 48 Hours, UPI, KCBS TV, LA. That's very impressive.
Well,
Jay, he was a man with this background in investigative reporting can appreciate what you're doing, as he does here, expressed so well.
Well, what I really loved about it was that at one time at CBS, when he was working with Dan Rather and other people in that category, he was known as one of the most honest men in the country. That was very impressive to hear people at CBS and others say how well respected he was. Great man.
And here are some more testimonials. This is from Dr. George S. Watkins. I personally find great value in using the Good Habit Company products, and I recommend them to my patients for building strong, positive habits. Another from Dr. Robert M. Blayich. Physicians of all types can help their patients enormously by recommending this stress relief program. Holistic thinking physicians realize that the person's body can do a much better job of healing itself when excess tension is reduced. The stress relief program is a useful tool to promote relaxation and reduce tension. And a third from Dr. Charles Johnson. I believe the stress release program is one of the most effective methods available for controlling stress. My clients love the price. Jay, I presume that those who got into a program like yoga or transcendental meditation might acquire some of the similar kinds of habits you induce through your program. But it may be something that is not available to them, and where this would be a far more efficient method for delivering the program necessary to reduce stress.
Well, what I'm very happy about is that I'm not touting this as the only thing that people can use. You have to use this and nothing else, which a lot of people that are programs do. This is the only thing. Well, with my program, you can use it in conjunction with something else. If you want to do yoga and you're feeling that's helping you, fine, great, keep doing it. But if you use my process along with that yoga or whatever you're doing out there, you can then have something that actually fits, because, again, yoga are different positions that everybody's learning how to do. So to be individualized, you could use this program in conjunction with what you're doing. And that gives you something that's very unique and can't be found anywhere else.
Yeah, what you're suggesting is that yoga or TM instruction is the same for everyone who undertakes it, whereas your approach is individualized to the person specific based upon their background experiences and abilities as you assess them through your preliminary examination.
Exactly. When you look at the self-help market, it's like 15 billion a year. And why is it growing by leaps and bounds? Because people are desperate and trying to find something that actually works. And there's this rehash of things over and over, like the Secret. I mean, The Secret was something that was redone from something that was in the early 20s by someone else. And by sitting back and thinking that if you just wish for it, if you just project your energy out into the universe, it's going to come back and affect you in a positive way. Come on. You got to do something a little better than that to get things going.
Can you scroll just a bit further so you can talk about a look at the GHC apps? No, show us the apps, Jay.
Oh, yeah.
Just talk about each of them.
Well, what happens is with the app, the first time you turn it on, you're going to have a questionnaire. You're going to find some instructions here. And then the instructions are going to tell you that there's a quiz coming up. So you click to get to the quiz right down here. You take the quiz, and at the end of the quiz, it will come up with a screen that gives you your results, that tells you how left brain or how right brain you are. Now, that might not mean anything to anyone listening to this at this time, but if you go to the website, it explains what that means. There's certain traits for left brain people, there's certain traits for right brain people. But if you, again, specifically fit the recordings that will now be downloaded after you take the quiz, those 5 recordings will be now set for your particular suggestibility, your particular type of learning. One will deal with cleansing the negativity from PTSD or stress from the past and the present. The next one will help you learn how to relax the body more effectively and efficiently. The next one will be dealing with calm, how to be calm in situations that in the past were disruptive. And then one that deals with motivation and getting you going and using all this. And then the 5th one is kind of a combination of all of the other 4. So now you're reinforcing all of them at once. And each one is tied in with a color. Like the cleansing is tied in with white, and it's suggested that every time you see the color white, it reinforces subconsciously your ability to cleanse the negativity of the past. Green is for the body, etc.
Would it be roughly correct to suggest that you're introducing a behavioral modification technique that's intended to reset the synapses with respect to their strength of triggering to bring about different responses to attenuate the stress responses, the immediate preemptive reaction, and thereby reduce the effects of post-traumatic stress?
Well, it seems like what I'm doing is helping them build new neural pathways. And once you build a new neural pathway, they find that the old one eventually disappears over time. And that's why you have to keep reinforcing the new one so that it eventually takes the place of the old one. So instead of having a lack of confidence as your habit, and I believe confidence is a habit, you either have a habit of being confident or not. So laying down these new neural pathways by making the suggestions fit your type of suggestibility or learning behavior, you're able to more quickly lay down these new neural pathways that end up taking over the old ones.
Now, Jay, if you scroll slightly further down, of course, you're talking about this as an application for support. Is this being submitted to the Pentagon, to the government, to the Veterans Administration?
What I'm doing right now is trying to find people that know how to do that. But I'm trying to educate myself and trying to hook into people that do know how to do those things so that I can get things going. In the meantime, I'm getting people that are sponsoring, trying to donate some money in order for me to get these apps because they're not cheap. And because once you take the quiz, then the results come up and then it automatically goes to the server and downloads the particular recordings that fit you as an individual. So right now, that's what I'm trying to work on.
Well, I think it's notable. You mentioned here no one receives a salary from this project, but I would certainly think it would be important that you should be reimbursed for the time and effort you expend on benefiting veterans, especially who may find relief here. Can you talk about your experience with different individual cases, the kind of experience that has led to those endorsements we've just reviewed?
Well, first I'd like to mention that eventually I would like to get some income off of this, but I want to give the PTSD relief kit. That's what I'm calling it, or PTSD stopper. I want to give that away. I want to give it for free to the veterans. Or if I can work something where the government will pay for it in order to get it into the hands of the veterans, that's great too. But later on, we're going to be coming out with apps for sports performance, because I've worked with Olympic athletes. I was a world-class athlete myself. So I'm going to be having apps for business people, athletes, kids in school, the arts for actors, musicians, etc., and then just keep building that. And that's where the income can come in to pay the people that are working for the company. But to start out, I'm dealing with PTSD. The first person that I worked with, like you mentioned, was I came out one night. I would come out late because I'd be working from 9 in the morning until 10 at night. And I came out this one night in Van Nuys, and I was walking down Victory Boulevard to get a taco at a taco place. And I saw this guy in the laying covered up in a doorway. So I didn't disturb him, but I went over and got him some food and a hot drink, hot coffee. And I came back and I said, "Excuse me," and I gave him the food. And he was very appreciative. And we started, because he was always there at night, so we would start talking. And I found out that he was a veteran, and I really didn't know much about it. I mean, I was a veteran at that time, but I didn't really know much about the veterans of PTSD. So I finally started working with him, and he would come in at night when everybody else was gone, because the guy that owned the place I was working at, I was chief of staff, and but he didn't like the idea that I gave anything for free. Over a few months, got him to where he could really feel more comfortable within himself. And then all of a sudden he disappears. And he's not in the doorway. He's just vanished. So I don't know if it was a few weeks or a month or two or so, I'm at the taco stand, and he comes up to me, and I didn't know who he was, because before he had this long hair and a beard and scruffy and this nice looking guy comes up, and he's in nice clothes, and he says, "Hi, Jay." And I said, I recognized his voice, and I said, "Wow, what's been happening?" And he says, "Well, I got cleaned up, as you can see, and I got a job, and I'm working." I think it was a mechanic he was working at. So he got a job, and that's what convinced me at that time that I needed to keep doing this. So from time to time, I would go into an area, because, again, around 30% of the homeless are veterans, and a lot of those are women too, not just the men. And so that's what I've been doing. But then I saw this Sergeant Ketchum story, and I'm thinking, son of a bitch, man. I'm up to here. I'm starting to get overloaded, and I don't get really overloaded at all. But I'm getting overloaded, and I want to do something about this. And I'm getting sick and tired of people mouthing off about how they want to help veterans and how they're going to do this and how they're going to do that. And they come up with programs that don't work or create more of a problem, or they just ignore the vets. And I'm sick and tired of it. And I want this app out there. That by itself at least can give a lot of good help to people. But
if you were to surmise, how large a sample base would you say has been in the background here of your approach, testing your approach to determine its degree of success?
Well, with PTSD, I probably worked with at least 300 or 400 veterans over the years. Now, with my process that I've used from the unemployed to heads of state, I mean, I've been hired by heads of state, presidential and royal families, and you know they can afford anybody. So I've worked on thousands and tens of thousands of cases over the years with people all over the world. And what's interesting is that, God, I don't know if we have time, but it's known that I worked with the King of Morocco, not the current, but his father. And but before he wanted me to work with him and his family, he sent me to see a general. And this general was, I remember me and my interpreter were taken into this office in Fez. And there was a general sitting behind this desk. And we sat down, and he had this very stern look on his face. And he said something, and then my interpreter said, he wants to know if you can control his mind, because my process was dealing with conscious and subconscious. And so I thought about it, and I looked very seriously at the general as I'm talking to my interpreter next to me. And I said, tell him that if I could control his mind, he'd be working for me and not the king. and he just cracked up laughing. And so I asked him what he wanted me to work on. And he said, smoking. He wanted to quit smoking. That was my big test in working with a guy that was one of the richest men, one of the top 10 richest men in the world, and was known as one of the best communicators when it came to negotiating.
Am I mistaken, Jay, or did his wife have a sleeping problem and you were able to succeed in dealing with that as well?
No, it wasn't his wife. While I was there waiting on one of my trips, they threw a big party. One of the dignitaries threw a big party. And a real nice home, and we went in, and we're having a drink, and my interpreter and I. Oh, one thing is that I asked where the bathroom was, so they tell me where the bathroom is, and I walk in, and it's just 4 walls, plain walls, with a concrete floor with a hole in it, and then 2 little impressions where your feet go, and a bucket in the corner. And that was
primitive.
Yeah, that was her toilet. And this was a nice home. It was a fairly modern home, but now in the hotel they had, regular, porcelain
facilities, sure.
Facilities. But anyway, so I'm talking to the guy that's throwing the party, and he mentions that, and again, this is all through an interpreter. He mentions that his wife has been suffering from insomnia for 25 years. Barely gets 1 or 2 hours of sleep a night, and it's driving her nuts, and therefore driving him nuts. So she then pops up and says, but I know about you, and I know about what you do, and I know for sure you couldn't help me. And I said, fine. Okay. So I'm sipping on my drink, and I said, I'm about to turn away, and I look back at her, and I say, but I was reading this very interesting article. Because what I had done is I had kind of sized her up from what she was saying and her physical movements and
demeanor,
demeanor. And so I turned back and I say, but I was reading this article that was well proven scientifically that it would help people with insomnia. And her eyes kind of lit up. And I said, sometime I'll have to talk to you about it. So then I turned away to walk away. It says, no, tell me about it. And I said, well, I remember it pretty clearly because I just read it last night on the plane. And so let me describe it to you, and you can do it yourself. It's kind of a do-it-yourself thing. So I say, is there a quiet room? And they take me into this room, and she sits in this chair. And I said, well, now what I'll do is I'll describe what it said you should do from the article. Close your eyes. So I take her through my process, and I'm implying constantly that things are going to happen rather than literally directly saying, you will sleep tonight, you will not have a problem anymore, which fits some type of learning behaviors. But with her, I knew she was going to pay more attention to what she thought I was doing. So I would say, well, the article said that you should close your eyes and you should do this breathing And they said, if you're doing it right, you're going to find. And so I take her through the breathing. I take her through suggestions about how she's going to wake up the next morning with a big smile on her face. Now, when you have insomnia and the next day you're picturing yourself waking up in the morning with a big smile on your face, what does that indicate? That you had a good night's sleep. So I never told her she was going to sleep well. I just kept giving her suggestions that she would be happy the next day, she'd have more energy, and on and on and on. So then I bring her out of it, and I say, well, that's what the article said. And she said, well, thank you very much. And we went off and finished the party. So the next day, after doing whatever I was doing on that day, I go to the airport to leave Morocco. And my interpreter was with me, and his parents lived there. That's how I got the gig in the first place, was because his father controlled all the yachts that the king had. And when the kid, my interpreter, who was a student of mine here in the U.S., told him about what I was doing, he told the king, and then that's how the king ended up inviting me to work with him. So getting back to the airport, we hear this commotion, and this guy's yelling and running up to us. And it was the guy that, the dignitary that threw the party. And he says, thank you, thank you, thank you. She slept for the first time all night in 25 years and put something in my hand and then took off. And I open up my hand, and there is a medal, a green medal. I don't think we have time. I could
just briefly, Jay.
Yeah. So I look at the medal. It's a green medal. It's actually called the green medal. The story behind it, my interpreter told me that he just gave you something that is almost as valuable as his family. He was one of 3,000 or 3,500 Moroccans that the king had sent into the desert to take over some territory that was illegally taken over, I think, by the Spanish. And so these guys walked in to take it back unarmed. This king was fabulous. So they all got a medal, and they're very rare, and they were only given to these 3,000 men or so, and he just gave it to me, and I still have it today.
Jay, that's a wonderful story. Let me ask now, is militarycafe.org where anyone could learn more about what you're doing?
Militarycafe.org is a really great organization I work with. And but you can always do a donation there and put a note that it's for my app for PTSD. But what I'm really doing is at goodhabitcompany.com.
Goodhabitcompany.com.
Yeah, that's where I'm really building all the information. You can find out more information about me. You can always go to jbartell.com.
Let me ask a question then about how I know the benefits are going to be immense for those who find reduced stress by way of your apps. How much do they run? Are they expensive for veterans?
First of all, for veterans, they're going to be free. I will not charge it for. Yeah, a veteran will not. All they got to do is just, no, the veterans are free. All the other ones for stress and the sports performance and all of those are going to be a charge. And I tell you, you're going to be blown away with this. They're probably going to be about from $10 to $15.
Jay, that's very modest. Again, is it the website, goodhabitcompany.com? Is that one word?
Yes, goodhabitcompany.com. But again, if they want to just contact me, they can do it at jbartell, BARTELL.com, jbartell.com, or 231club.com, where I talk about the book and all of that side of the
Well, Jay, I can't thank you enough. I think you're doing something tremendously good, and it ought to, I would hope, have a severe impact in reducing the rate of suicide among veterans who have the opportunity to take advantage of your good work. This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, thanking my special guest, Jay Bartell, for being here, and all of you for watching.
Thank you, Jim.